Do and observe all things whatsoever they tell you, but do not follow their example. Their works are performed to be seen. These are the words of our Lord Jesus Christ, directed to the Jews in regards to the scribes and Pharisees. And the scribes and the Pharisees were the men that were well versed in the laws of God and God's directives. And they were supposed to be guiding the people in how to love and to serve God. But unfortunately, they themselves did not love God, because everything that they did was for the sake of being seen by others, to receive the honor and the praise of the people of Israel, because they love places of honor at banquets, seats of honor in synagogues, greetings in marketplaces, and the salutation, Rabbi. These men would instruct the people in God's laws and what God was asking of them, truly, and they would be the ones that would follow them more strictly than anyone else. But they did it for the wrong reasons, and so their hearts were far from God. It was all a show. There was nothing authentic about it. They all did it for the sake of vanity. This is why the scribes and the Pharisees would widen their phylacteries and lengthen their tassels. You see, the Jewish phylactery was this small leather box that the Jewish men, when they went to their periods of prayer, they would strap them to their forehead and they would strap them to their forearm. Because inside of this small leather box were these tiny scrolls, and these scrolls had God's laws written on them. And so it was supposed to be a constant reminder to always have God's commandments before them. It comes from the Old Testament. When Moses spoke to the people of Israel, he told them to always have God's commandments as a sign on their hand and as a reminder on their forehead. But the later Jews took that to be quite literally, and so they decided to take God's laws and literally plaster them on their forehead and attach them to their arm. It would be today the equivalent of someone taking a pen and writing it on their hand, something to remind them. It was supposed to be a reminder of God's commandments. It was the same thing with the tassels. In the book of Numbers, God tells the people of Israel that they are to be set apart, a nation that is set apart from all others, not only in their identity, but also in the way they dress, in their clothing. And so he commands the men of Israel to put tassels on the four corners of their garments, as once again, a reminder of who they are in relationship to God. But the scribes and the Pharisees, they would make their phylacteries and their tassels really big because they wanted to make sure everyone else saw them. And so it was no longer a reminder of God's laws and commandments, but instead it was a reminder for everyone else of how well they observed God's laws. Because all it was for them was receiving the honor and praise of the people. And so Christ calls them hypocrites, because although externally they fulfill God's laws better than anyone else, but their hearts are far from him because they are doing it for the wrong reasons. And so we see that from Christ's admonishment of the scribes and Pharisees in today's gospel, that a bad intention can make a perfectly good action, one that is even commanded by God. It can make that good action evil. Christ tells the Jews to listen to what the scribes and Pharisees are instructing them, because they are indeed teaching them the laws of God, but not to follow their example in carrying it out, because it's all for show. It's not authentic. That it's more than just the external display, but more importantly, the reason why we do something. And this is because intention, if you recall, is one of the three factors that determine whether a human action is good or evil. Remember, there are three factors to every human act. that will determine whether it is morally good or morally evil. And all three of these factors have to be good, otherwise the entire action is evil. The first and the most important factor is the act itself. There are some acts that are intrinsically evil, which means that they can never be good because they always violate the nature of the human person, such as murder, rape, adultery, homosexuality, contraception. All of these actions are always evil and can never be good because they always violate the human person. And so the act itself is always the first and most important thing considered. And it must be good in order for it to be morally permissible. Pretty straightforward, right? But the second factor is the intention or the motivation of the individual. Why we do what we are doing. So for example, if I were to give money to the poor, not because I want to help someone in need, but because I want to get everyone that sees me doing it to think I'm a really great guy. Well, I just took the good act of almsgiving and turned it into the evil action of seeking vainglory. Your intention must be good. And then the third and final factor is the circumstance, or the situation or context in which the action is done. So, for example, if I see someone on the streets that is in need of money for clothing and food, but this person is a drug addict or an alcoholic, and I give them money, which is a charitable thing to do, but it's still wrong because they would take that money and they would go spend it on alcohol and drugs, doing harm to themselves instead of doing good. The good action of giving money, which is something charitable, and also having the right motivation, wanting to help someone that is in need, it's still wrong because the circumstance will bring about evil. And so when we look at the case of the scribes and the Pharisees, we see that the action that they are doing, it's good. They're following God's directives. They're following God's laws. The circumstance in which they are doing it, it's all good. But their motivation and their intention is wrong. They are doing it all for the wrong reason. They are doing it for the sake of vanity, which makes their entire action evil. And so this should serve as a point of reflection in our own lives across the board of why we do the things we do. Why did I get married? Is it to help my spouse to heaven and allow them to help me living a virtuous life? Is it to raise a family, to teach my children to love and serve God and to also live a life of virtue? Or did I get married so I could finally sleep with someone as a Catholic? Why did I become a priest? Was it for the salvation of souls? Or was it because I want the attention and affirmation of the people? Or a platform in which you all have to sit here and listen to me talk? Or even the attention and recognition of my homilies being put up on YouTube and being heard? Why do I come to Mass on Sunday? Is it to worship and adore God, my Creator, who died for my sins? Or is it because my spouse is making me come and I don't want to make them angry? You see, all of these good actions can be turned morally evil if we do not have the right intention. It is very important that we have the right intention. And the one question that we must ask ourselves and that we must have the correct motivation for is, why are we Catholic? What is the reason that we are Catholic? There's only one acceptable answer to this question. It's not because I was raised Catholic. It's not because my husband or wife is Catholic. It's not because they have pretty churches and I like the personality of the local priest. No, these are all wrong reasons for being Catholic. And if this is your reason for being Catholic, then you are walking according to the path of the scribes and Pharisees, who were doing the right thing with a bad intention. The only acceptable answer to the question why we are Catholic is because it is the only church established by God, and because of this, contains his divinely revealed truths in its entirety, becoming the means of our salvation. This must be our reason for being Catholic. It is God's one and only church. No other reason is acceptable. And it is so important that we have the correct motivation for being Catholic, because if we do not, when we undergo times of persecution, and whether that be externally from anti-religious or anti-Catholic forces or acts of government, or whether that be internally from the temptations of the devil, when we undergo those times of trial, if we are not Catholic for the right reason, we will abandon our Catholic faith. I promise you that. If you do not have the conviction that the Catholic Church is the true Church of Christ, then once your Catholic faith becomes inconvenient or gets in the way of something that you want, you will drop it like a hot potato. I promise you that. You ever wonder why so many people leave the Catholic faith after years and years of being Catholic? We all have them in our family, whether they be brothers or sisters, sons or daughters, aunts or uncles. After years and years of being Catholic, they just all of a sudden up and leave the faith. And this is because they were never Catholic for the right reason. There is a very common phenomenon of children who come from fervent Catholic homes. And after years of being Catholic, all of a sudden, once they reach their adult life, they will leave the Catholic faith. And it will leave some people baffled. But there's no mystery to this. It's because they were not Catholic for the right reason. And once their Catholic faith or the Catholic lifestyle got in the way of what seemed to them a much better offer, they were more than willing to leave the church. And this is why it is so important that you raise your children and teach them and instruct them in why they are Catholic. It is not sufficient that you just let them grow up in the Catholic faith. They need to understand the reason why. So that way they can have the right intention, the right motivation for being Catholic. And then it won't be just this temporary reality until they leave the house, but it will be something that is permanent in their life. And the same goes for all of us. We need to have that right reason of being Catholic. We need to have that right intention. Because once the going gets tough, if we are not Catholic for the right reason, we will bail on our Catholic faith. Our Catholicism is not for show. We are not the scribes and the Pharisees. We don't do this to be seen by others. Our Catholicism is not here so we can be loved by our family and friends, or be liked by others to make other people happy. The reason why we are Catholic is because it's God's one and only church, and He has established this church for our salvation and the salvation of all. This must be our reason for being Catholics. If it's not, you are Catholic for the wrong reason, and it needs to change. You are going to be like the scribes and Pharisees. Remember that a bad intention can make a perfectly good action, even one that is commanded by God, like being part of the Catholic Church. It can make that good action evil. And so the question that you all need to ask yourselves today, and it needs to be answered authentically, is why are you Catholic?